About 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to read the Bible from cover to cover, and when I got to the prophets, I noticed that some of the current events were starting to mirror what was happening in the Bible. So I thought, this is interesting. So I read several English translations, and each one had varying differences, little varying differences in each one. So I decided that I'm going to learn the original language. That way I can read the Bible in the language that it was written in. So first thing I did was I got online and I looked up the Alef-bet, and I went home that night and I memorized the first half the first night, and then the next night I memorized the second half, and then from that point forward I started looking up every word in the Hebrew Bible. I started with Bereshit, and I just kept looking things up, and as I progressed I realized that a lot of the Hebrew you have to know the shoresh in order to find it. So it's very helpful if you go and get a Hebrew dictionary to look the words up. And you also have to know what the shoresh is. So the shoresh is the root word of any Hebrew word. And if you know that, then it's very helpful for looking the words up. And as I was looking words up one day online, someone instant messaged me and asked me if I wanted to learn modern day Hebrew. And I said, okay. So I signed up for a modern day Hebrew class so that I could learn how to communicate. I had already taught myself to read, write, and speak it, but to understand Hebrew, to hear it and understand it, it's important that you have communication with someone that speaks Hebrew. So I signed up for the class in order to get that kind of practice. Studying Hebrew has absolutely been a blessing to my life. It has opened up so many more doors, so many more experiences. It's just been an amazing journey. I met a girl online in my Hebrew class that was going to Israel, and she invited me along for the trip. So I went with this girl. I met another girl over there, and since then I've made lots of friends. I know people all over the country now, and it's just been such a blessing. Another blessing about learning Hebrew is that you learn all kinds of little nuggets that you didn't know about in the Bible. When you understand Hebrew in the original language, you have all these little nuances that you wouldn't pick up if you didn't understand the language. So it's really, really a neat thing. I would say one of the hardest things about learning Hebrew is learning to conjugate the verbs. And they're called binyan, and they're kind of building blocks. Every single verb is conjugated for past tense, present tense, future tense, for male, female. So every verb has several different ways to pronounce it. And what's hard is knowing what the shoresh is. And if you know that, it can help you out. I think if I would have known at the beginning, I would have went and bought my 501 Hebrew verbs fully conjugated book, because that's been very instrumental in helping me to actually learn the language, the spoken language. I'm using the Hebrew to actually help me write my own Bible translation. I've actually written several and what I found helpful when I'm studying is to write one verse out in the original Hebrew in block style, and there's also cursive Hebrew. Then I write it in cursive. It writes right to left, and then I write it, and then I try to translate it in English by myself. And there's always one or two words that you'd have to look up, but in that way I'm forming my own Bible compilation, which is kind of interesting. So, and you can see from when I first started till now how I've progressed in my learning, and so it helps with repetition too. There's a lot of repetitive in the Bible, so that helps you get a grasp on the basics. Modern Hebrew is a little bit more advanced than biblical because there's a lot more stuff now. There's a lot more words, Hebrew words. So, but it's also a blessing to pray in Hebrew when you're talking to your Creator, to speak to Him in the language that He introduced Himself to mankind in. That's always neat. I would encourage anyone who is interested in learning Hebrew to do it. It's an amazing, it's so much fun. It's like working crossword puzzles. It's my favorite pastime. I do it all the time. I get up in the morning, it's all I can think about. It's a lot of fun. I would start with the basics, with the Alef-bet, and I would also I would get the 501 Hebrew words or Hebrew verbs fully conjugated, and also a Hebrew dictionary, and that's where I would start. You should learn Hebrew because it's the language of the angels. It's the language that God introduced Himself to mankind through, and I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to be the language in the future. It's going to be the universal language. So, all good reasons to learn Hebrew.